The stories we pass down shape our reality, how we see ourselves and others. Some of our greatest figures have been erased from the history books. Heroes and legends, risk takers and trailblazers, role models and rebels. Robert Smalls was all that and more. Born into slavery, he became a hero of the Civil War and served 5 terms in Congress.
But the journey to freedom and what happened after was where my real legend was formed. And I was at a time the most famous black man in the world. It all started in Beaufort, South Carolina. I was born in 1839, in a shack behind my slave master's house here. He sent me to work in Charleston at 12 years of age, and he allowed me to keep $1 out of the $16 I earned in a month. The journey to Charleston was 2 days by carriage and 5 hours by steamer. It felt like a whole different world when I arrived. My first job was as a waiter at the Planter Hotel. After that, I was a street lamplighter, and I spent years learning my way around the city. As a slave, it was against the law for me to read or write, but they couldn't stop me from learning everything else. I always felt a connection with the water. It wasn't long before I found work on the docks. I started at the bottom, loading and unloading the ships, and worked my way up, learning all the ropes. Before long, I knew the docks, the ships, and the canals and waterways like the back of my hand. If someone had a question, I had the answer. Eventually, I worked my way up to captain of the Planter. They couldn't call me captain because of my skin color, but I was behind the wheel, so you figure it out. As a child, my mother made sure I wasn't sheltered from the real world. She took me to experience the slave auctions and introduced me to the sugar house, where slaves were sent to be tortured and punished. I went to the cotton fields in the sweltering heat so I could see firsthand how some of us were forced to survive. I saw children living through hell, having their lives decided for them. All the slaves in Charleston had to wear slave badges so that we could be tracked. Charleston is also where I found my wife, Hannah. I married her at 17 with permission from our masters. We started to build our family soon after. Elizabeth and Robert Jr. were born slaves, but our third child, Sarah, would be born free. At any point, if our masters felt like it, any one of my family could be sold off and never seen again. My mother was separated from her family at 9 years old. The Planter would help to make sure that would not happen again. This ship became part of the family when we rode her to freedom. I watched and waited for our best chance to escape. I listened to the chatter on the streets and talked to the slaves and the freedmen. War was upon us, and South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. We had everything we needed to sail to freedom, but I wasn't ready. The Planter was scheduled to move 4 major artillery guns soon. I wanted those guns. It would be a prize for the Union. So we waited until the guns were aboard. Finally, the day arrived. We were assigned to stay on the ship for the night. The white officers were supposed to stay on board too, but broke their own rules and left us alone. In the middle of the night, we got the engine going on the Planter and prayed the noise would not attract attention. We got moving while everyone slept. We raised the flags. My last time ever flying under a Confederate flag. I donned the captain's hat to disguise myself and we were off. We were headed out on the journey of our lives. Freedom or death were the only options now. First, we traveled further into Confederate territory where the women and children could meet us without attracting attention. There was no freedom without my wife and family. The women made sure slave patrol was nowhere in sight, then came out to meet us.
The woman and children hid underneath and we got to moving. The other women had no idea when they woke up that morning they'd be free before they slept again.
I studied the captain. I knew all his mannerisms. I knew the routes to travel to avoid suspicion and avoid the mines. There were 5 forts between us and freedom, and I had the intel on each one. Pinckney was mostly abandoned, so we rolled by there before things got really interesting.
He was fearless. His knees never buckled the entire trip. We were on our way, signaling each checkpoint with the steam whistle. Countless guns and cannons pointed right at us. He navigated us through like it was nothing. We agreed. If they discovered us, we would use the guns and ammo on board to fight, or we'd sink the ship, lock hands, and go down with it. They would have tortured us something awful if we were captured. 5 Confederate forts, hundreds of soldiers, underwater mines, and patrol boats. We had to navigate a gauntlet to find freedom.
My first and only time working with an all-black crew, and we handled it like the old vets we were.
We couldn't be stopped. God was clearly on our side.
Finally, it was only Fort Sumter that stood between us and freedom.
The most heavily armed fort of them all. They had more cannons than we had people. The crew wanted to steer wide of the fort, but Robert knew that would only attract attention. We had to stare the cannons in the face if we had any chance to survive. He timed things perfectly. We rolled by Fort Sumter at 4:30 a.m. when even the white folks' silhouette is black. We gave the signal, 2 long and 1 short whistle, and we waited. If we were clear to go, we should hear a whistle reply.
And if we didn't hear a whistle, we'd probably be hearing those cannons.
We were clear.
By the time they figured out what was going on, we were outside the range of the cannons. I can just imagine the look on their faces when they figured it out. Underestimating us was their first and last mistake. I always felt that I was a man and ought to be free, and I would be free or die. A new day was upon us, but we weren't out of danger yet. We still had to go face to face with the Union blockade. We took down the Confederate flag and raised a white bedsheet Hannah brought from home. The fog was rolling in. We prayed they could still see the flag and would allow us to surrender. The captain gave the order, prepare to fire. By the grace of God, they spotted our flag just in time. I could see their crew looking for a white officer in charge, but the only thing white was our flag. Union officers boarded the planter in disbelief. I couldn't wait to greet the captain. "Good morning, sir. I am delivering this war material, including these cannons, and I think Uncle Abraham Lincoln can put them to good use." We became immediate friends. We requested an American flag to be raised over the planter. I handed over the captain's code book containing the Confederate signals for communication at sea. I told them all about the Charleston defenses and how best to attack, and the location of the lines we laid in the harbor. We delivered newspapers from Charleston full of information, and they had the planter herself and guns and ammo that would be sorely missed by the South. It was a national disgrace for them. They placed a $5,000 reward on my head, but they got to keep their money. At 23 years old, I delivered 16 men, women, and children to freedom. By morning, word was spreading like wildfire. Heroes of the Union. Unparalleled bravery, remarkable courage and intelligence, turning point in naval operations. The nation was shocked a group of slaves could pull off such an act of cunning and bravery. They etched my face into the newspapers and Harper's Weekly, and they sold my image on the streets of Philadelphia alongside photos of the White House. They called it one of the most daring and heroic adventures since the war was commenced. They knew my name across the Atlantic. 3 months after we found freedom, I was on my way to the White House. It felt like a dream when President Lincoln called for me. Mr. Lincoln wanted to know if black people could make good soldiers, if allowed to serve. Before I came along, the Union wasn't sure if we would want to fight for our freedom and if we could help. Frederick Douglass had tried to convince Lincoln, but now we had proof of what we could do. After our meeting, I delivered the directive that black soldiers would be allowed in the fight to end slavery. Black soldiers gave the Union a crucial edge on the battlefield, securing victory when help was desperately needed. I recruited 5,000 soldiers personally. Eventually, 200,000 black soldiers and 20,000 Navy sailors would help lead the Union to victory. Even with subpar weapons, equipment, and pay, we were proud, brave soldiers, and we fought like it. It's fair to say freedom changed my life. I went from earning $1 a week as a slave to earning $150 a month as a member of the U.S. military. Plus, my $1,500 reward Congress granted us as part of the prize money for the capture of the planter. By the time the war came to an end, I'd have more money than I dreamed possible. And I have enough to make a difference. In the Navy, I had the honor of being one of the first to bring this iron monster designed to withstand anything into battle. It helped save us that day and took some major damage. It turned out the ironclad ships were not built to last, or steer, or maneuver, and those ships were quickly retired. I took part in 17 military engagements, including the assault on Fort Sumter. I was promoted to the rank of captain for valiance under fire, and was the first black man to captain a military vessel. Fort Sumter was where the war first got started and a key strategic fortified target. We reduced it to a pile of rubble. I had the opportunity to spend some time in Philadelphia while waiting on repairs for the planter, and I tried to make the most of it. Philadelphia was booming from the war. I couldn't wait to learn to read, and now I could afford the best help. I hired Octavius Cato, the principal at the Institute of Colored Youth, to come and teach me. I'd get up at 5 a.m. and study before Mr. Cato arrived. I had many chances to share our adventure, and I filled many buildings for speaking engagements. My purpose was not just to entertain, but to inspire people to join the fight for freedom. The North was not always the friendliest of places for my people either. We could be sent down south or forced to live in a camp if the wrong person crosses you. I was a war hero, and still they tried to make me give up my seat for a white woman. It still wasn't clear if all men are created equal applied to us. 100 years before Rosa Parks, I refused to ride in their designated black area outside the car. I helped form mass boycotts of segregated public transportation, along with Octavio and Caroline LeCount. When we were done, there was a new city law that outlawed segregated streetcars.
When the war came to an end, it was time to return home to South Carolina and his family. Robert was ready to get to work helping anywhere he could. At 24 years old, he bought his former master's home at a government auction. This is the place we called home for the rest of our years. And the master bedroom belonged to us. Robert was good to everyone. He even welcomed the wife of his former slave master and their children to stay at the house when times were hard for them.
The old homestead and its surroundings are mine, and I should leave it for my children to enjoy. Just 5 days after the Civil War ended, they killed Lincoln. The country was in turmoil. We won the war, but no one told the South. The battles for freedom were just getting started. 700,000 dead. 4 million newly freed slaves trying to figure out what was next for them. The Klan became a thing as soon as the war ended. Destruction all over the place, and our leader was gone. This was not the victory we hoped for. Andrew Johnson was a much different man than Uncle Abe. He was a former slave owner who fought hard against civil rights and citizenship for black people. The 40 acres and a mule promise disappeared with this man. I bought a 2-story building and started a school for black children and freedmen after the government gave away our old school. I didn't want anyone being able to control our narrative, so I started a newspaper, the Southern Standard. Along with my partners, we started a railroad company, the only railroad in history founded entirely by African Americans. We transported passengers and freight from the shores to the inland. To rejoin the Union, South Carolina had to draft a new constitution that guaranteed all men the right to vote and serve. All of a sudden, black people outnumbered white people in many districts. These fine gentlemen are the first colored senators and representatives to serve in the U.S. Congress. Not quite how we were used to being portrayed. I was in the next class to serve, elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. I worked to pass a civil rights bill that I introduced before moving on to the U.S. House of Representatives, where I served 5 terms. With my influence, University of South Carolina became the first public university in the South to be open to black and white students. I worked hard for free schooling for all of South Carolina children and helped start the nation's first public school system and to give us rights to public transportation. I fought tirelessly against segregation, for fair and inclusive voting rights, and later had to fight against the Jim Crow laws. And I worked on state constitutional revisions on to see our rights still dwindle away. Mr. Lincoln was a fair man and saw us as people. Things were different when he was gone. Congress supported us at first and passed a civil rights bill, overcoming Johnson's veto, but federal support vanished fast. And Johnson removed the troops that were there to protect us. Voter intimidation, poll taxes, literacy tests, constitution quizzes. They came up with everything they could to take our rights away.
It would take nearly a century before we saw a comparable number of black members in Congress again.
Helped end slavery, improved education for all children, and found freedom and a better life for my family and crew. I lived a life I was proud of. Although much of our progress was lost after Reconstruction, I was a war hero. I was an example of what my people could achieve, if given a fair opportunity. When you know who you are and what your history has been, then you have a sense of what is expected of you.